Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Gosh, sorry, my voice sounds a little bit croaky. So before I launch in today, I just want to say, if you have been listening on Spotify and you have noticed that the midweek episodes have not been appearing yet, there's been a little glitch. We're not quite sure exactly why it hasn't been happening, but if you've been missing those midweek episodes for the month of February, you will need to go and listen to them on another app. So Apple or Podbean or Podtail or Google, somewhere else, just to catch up on those episodes. So I'm really sorry about that, but I'm hoping from today everything is going to go smoothly. Okay, so today I am going to be talking about relapse. And relapse is an absolutely normal and inevitable part of eating disorder recovery. It's incredibly rare ever, I think, that someone can just stop their eating disorder behaviours overnight, because we have to deal with food every day. And of course, if you have been using eating disorder behaviours for a long time, it's a coping strategy. So if you suddenly just try and rip your coping strategy away and, you're not going to have replacement strategies immediately available, it's going to feel really tough and overwhelming. So it's really helpful to expect relapse, to almost welcome it and to see it as learning experience. So it could be lapsing back into restrictive eating, binge eating, purging, over-exercising, chewing and spitting. It could be a whole range of ways that relapse could show up. And I guess in whatever way it shows up, it can be pretty stressful and overwhelming. But relapses are also really valuable for gaining insight and awareness about your triggers. You really get to understand what it is that makes you vulnerable to using eating disorder behaviours to cope. So let's try to call relapses blips or learning experiences, or another word that works for you where it takes away that criticism and feeling of failure, almost inviting them in, welcoming them as a normal part of recovery. So embrace relapses, see them as part of the recovery process. And over time, as you move along the recovery road, you will relapse less in frequency and you'll recover faster. So you're never back to square one. And I think this is so important because I've been thinking of someone I've worked with quite recently who started to relapse. And once they're on that relapse path, they just felt so overwhelmed, such a failure in recovery, and almost it was very, very hard to get off that slippery slope of going downwards. And so much of the problem with that was almost framing the relapse as a disaster, as a catastrophe, feeling that recovery wasn't working for them, and then almost just like throwing in the towel. And that's so understandable. I'm saying that with huge compassion because I think sometimes when we're letting go of a coping strategy, it can feel overwhelming to have to deal with life without it. So it's understandable, these ups and downs and these feelings of failure, but if you can embrace the bumpy road of recovery, you are in a good place. Okay, so let's talk about 6 tips to deal with lapses. So number 1, really try to stop the catastrophizing, the catastrophic thinking about lapses. Okay, so a relapse is a bit like falling off a bike on a bike ride. So maybe you fell off due to unexpected hazards in the road. It doesn't mean you're back to square one just because you've fallen off. You can dust yourself back off and get back on the bike. So stopping on the way or taking a diversion from your desired path does not conflict with your determination to get there in the end. So think as well, if you were teaching a child to ride a bike and the child falls off, you're not going to say to them, oh my goodness, you've completely failed. Don't bother getting back on the bike. You're just completely losing at this. Because if you're so discouraging, as we can often be to ourselves, the child wouldn't want to ride a bike. They just think, oh my goodness, I'm just rubbish at this. This is hopeless. This is overwhelming. I don't want to get back on the bike again. We're not like that though, are we? If we're teaching a child to ride a bike, we are encouraging, we are supportive, we are noticing all the things that are going well. We're completely there for them and behind them. So try to think about your own lapses in recovery in a similar vein, okay? Offer yourself the kindness and compassion that you would offer to anyone in your life if they were going through a difficult patch. anyone else who was trying out a new behaviour and maybe having a few kind of, knockbacks along the way. Okay, a lapse is not a catastrophe. It is an inevitable blip and you will survive and get back on track. Okay, number 2, really view it as a learning experience. Examine what was going on which led up to the lapse in the first place, and then you can problem solve for next time. What could you do instead? So look at it with lots of curiosity and compassion. Now, I know for myself in my recovery, common triggers for me with lapsing back into binge eating included things like not eating enough in the day, then maybe getting over hungry and losing control around food. So for me, establishing regular eating, stabilising blood sugar, and planning my eating episodes all helped to make sure that I avoided the over hunger trigger. Now, another trigger for me was driving myself just too hard, not having a break. So I would regularly, as a student, push myself to finish an essay well beyond the point of when my brain could function effectively. And then I'd feel really angry, frustrated with myself for not achieving or being productive. And I would often then use food to distract and escape from the situation rather than allowing myself to have a break earlier, like a proper intentional break, and to take time away from the stressor. So those are just a couple of my triggers, and you will have your own personal ones, but I guess it's really helpful just to tune in and notice, like, what is it that often triggers you to have a lapse, and how could you prevent that? Because I think prevention is the best way sometimes, because I always think of like a binge eating episode, a chewing and spitting episode. All these things are often at the end point of a cumulative load of things that have been leading up to it. So it's really, really hard to make the decision, maybe not to binge eat, not to chew and spit almost when you're standing on the edge of the cliff about to jump. It's much easier to be looking at all the little things that maybe led you to the edge in the first place, and then you can kind of work backwards and also prevent things happening in the first place. So like with me, it's going to be really, really hard to prevent a binge if I was absolutely over hungry. I was not going to be able to kind of use helpful strategies in an over hungry state to be able to stop myself from binging. But maybe if I was in the future thinking about regular eating, making sure my blood sugar was stable, not getting to over hunger in the first place, that is so much more preferable. So yeah, all helpful. Number 3, attribute to outside influence if a lapse does occur. So of course, we need to take responsibility for our relationship with food. However, it's not helpful to get into a punishing and self-blaming dialogue. So for example, if you have a lapse, just see it as you were in a high-risk situation. So maybe you were triggered by something. Maybe you got over hungry. Maybe there was a conflict situation. Maybe you just had no time to self-care. Maybe you had a really overwhelming day. And because of this, you had very low motivation at that point to deal with things in an effective way. So have compassion and understanding for yourself in this situation. You know, you were just in a vulnerable spot and no wonder that you struggled. So it's much better to view it from that perspective rather than to think, oh my goodness, there's something really wrong with me. I'm never going to change. I'm a failure. And berating yourself in a very personal sort of derogatory way, because that is not going to be motivating for change. Okay. So if you try to motivate yourself from a place of really low self-worth by beating yourself up, change can feel insurmountable. Whereas if you just think, okay, this was a bit of a blip, you know, lots was going on that day. Of course, I kind of fell back into my old coping strategy. It's not surprising. Then it gives you a lot more power and choice to be able to do things differently and not to feel so bad about just what happened. So time for a short advertisement break. I know that we talk a lot about food freedom on this podcast and how important it is to take care of yourself mentally and physically as you learn to navigate a culture inundated with toxic messaging. One of the best ways to take care of yourself is through exercise, but I know it can be really hard to find an exercise program that isn't rooted in these toxic messages and doesn't feel triggering. Well, I recently met Katie, the owner of an amazing new exercise company called WeShape. And WeShape doesn't focus on calorie counting, tracking how much you work out, or making you feel bad about your body to get you motivated. Instead, They create a customized exercise routine for you that helps you connect with and care for your body rather than feel pressure to change it. They help you learn to set intentions that come from a place of self-care rather than self-judgment, and they support you every step of the way with an amazing community and live coaching so you can make exercise a self-care practice that helps you feel better in your body and about your body. Plus, they're giving listeners of the show the chance to try it out for 2 full weeks for free. Just head on over to reshape.com/freedom or check out the link in the show notes to get started today. Okay, number 4, enhance motivation to get back on track after a lapse. So this is not about being good and restricting, okay, because that's the way you might interpret it. So it's getting back on track with your regular eating, your self-care, looking after yourself. So how do you do this? Well, I think after you've had a lapse, you'll feel very agitated and low self-worth. Your emotions may be very dysregulated. So the best thing to do is to be able to access that calmer mind, that wise mind that was helping you on the recovery road. You need to get yourself in a calmer state, because if you are just full of kind of negative emotion, if you are completely dysregulated and overwhelmed, it's really, really hard to be able to kind of get back on track and look after yourself. So you might need to do something to really soothe your nervous system. So maybe this is like laying down on the bed for a little bit, having some peace, maybe doing some deep breathing, maybe going outside for a walk, changing your environment, maybe it's talking to a friend, but something that makes you feel soothed, okay? And, just try and do that, prioritize that, because you're not going to feel like doing that maybe post-binge or post-relapse, post-lapse. Self-care or rest. So what can you do to create good feelings and to reduce that agitation? Love and approval of the self work far better to reverse negative feelings. Even if you don't feel like self-caring, go ahead and do it anyway. Okay, see it as a learning experience. So you haven't blown it, so you might as well completely blow it and write off recovery. No way. So just be really kind to yourself, be compassionate with yourself, attribute to outside influence, and just see it as that learning experience, that blip. Number 5, use lots of positive self-talk. Again, in the moment, this may be the very last thing that you feel like doing, and you may need to really soothe your nervous system, slow down, take some time to rest or go for a walk or do something to get yourself back to a place of a more peaceful state first. So find statements once you're in that place that are meaningful to you and write them down. Putting pen to paper can be empowering and make the thinking more solid and embedded in your psyche. So you might need to write these down in a place when you are not in a lapse state at all, when you're feeling fairly positive about your recovery, where you're kind of getting some momentum, where you're feeling that things are going a bit better. And you almost need to create this little toolkit of affirmations, of positive statements that are going to help you. So things like, I refuse to judge myself by the things I do wrong without counting the thousands of things I do right. I can learn something from this experience which will help me cope better in the future. I approve of myself. What is the nicest possible thing I can do for myself right now? And then when you're in that post-lapse state of not feeling good, once you've had a chance to calm down, look at your statements, maybe rewrite them out, say them out loud to yourself. Okay, really start to embed them. Really give yourself the encouragement and support that you would do to anyone else in this situation. And number 6, renew commitment. So this means like kind of getting back on the bike, getting back on the horse, making sure your goals are realistic. Aim for goals that are manageable and sustainable long term. Remember why you're wanting to change, why you're on this healing journey in the first place. Have a vision board handy with your goals and aspirations so you can look at it and be reminded of all the different reasons why you are on this road. And have recovery strategies to get back on track with your journey. So say, for example, if you've had a kind of binge and purge episode, maybe you want to really make sure that you don't restrict, that you get back on track with your regular eating, that maybe you talk to a friend, that you organise some self-care in that evening or something. So have things to help you regulate your mood, feel calmer, access that wiser mind, and feel more motivated again. And sometimes this can be really, really hard. So I think important to really have compassion to yourself. I think when we're in that kind of lapse mode, sometimes it can just feel like everything's too much, it's overwhelming, I can't do this, and you want to throw in the towel. But don't do that. That might be how you feel in this moment. That is not how you're going to feel consistently. Have faith in yourself. You can do this. Relapses are normal. Lapses are inevitable. Be kind and compassionate to yourself. Recovery is absolutely possible. And I know for myself, when I was trying to get out of the binge and purge cycle, I had numerous lapses before I fully exited that cycle for good. Okay, and it was part of the process. But over time, your lapses will become shorter, you'll recover from them faster, and you will sometimes even just get to the point where you have the thought of a lapse and it doesn't even happen. And that's where you can really notice you're making progress. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoy this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.